Okay friends, welcome back. Today we are making a sponge holder, and that is somewhere where you can dry out your sponge after you're using it for washing dishes or whatever you're using your sponge for. So the first thing you need to do is cut out the templates, and then the K4 template needs to be pieced together because this piece was too long to print on one page of paper. So you just need to use some tape and connect them together. I want to remind you guys to print at 100% scale if you want your templates to be the same size that mine are in this video. That is a setting that you can usually find when you're printing out the templates. But of course, like all my templates, you can size them up or down to fit whatever sponge you want. So as usual, I'm using 1/2 centimeter thickness gauges to roll out my clay, and then I'll compress it with a rib. Then you just want to lay down your templates and cut them out. So you're going to want to cut out one piece of K1 and K4, and then 2 pieces of K2, and the last piece, K3, that's actually just a guide, so you don't need to cut out any shapes for K3. And then, as usual, I like to put my cutout pieces in front of the fan to dry out a little bit. This just makes them a little easier to work with. They're not quite as floppy as they otherwise would be, but this very much depends on your clay, so you might be able to skip the fan step. Okay, we're going to start with the long piece. This is going to be the foot, and we just need to piece it together in a circle for the beginning. So I'm using my tool to cut a 45-degree angle. If you don't have this tool, you can just use a knife, and then you need to score each edge. If you need to use some slip here, you can. I'm just using a little bit of water to piece them together. And then you want to go ahead and blend them right away. Okay, moving on to the main body of the piece. So here's where we're going to be using our guide. And I'm just marking along here because this is going to help us know where to put the foot. So this is the guide for where to put the foot, basically, so you can get it nice and centered. And just, place it in there as best as you can, as evenly as you can. And then I'm marking it once again because it's not exactly where the guide is, and that's fine. So I marked it again so I know exactly where to score. And I'll score both sides as per usual, add a little bit of water or slip if you need it, and attach. Okay, so the next step, we need to give this base a little bit of curve. So I'm using my hands to just press that inward a little bit. I want to make it curve in a little bit, nice and evenly, keeping an eye on the foot that you're not distorting the foot. And then I'm also going to use my fingers to turn the edges, these edges right here, into sort of like a spout shape. Now this is totally optional, but I thought it would be a nice little touch so you can empty the dish and you can just pour the water off the end like that. Now I'm cleaning up any extra scoring lines here and using my paintbrush to smooth it out. Okay, and then we're going to move on to the sponge supports. So in order for them to fit on this curved surface now, you actually need to bend them a little bit here. So just bend it just a little bit like I did and hold it in place, and then you can use your needle tool to mark exactly where it needs to go, where you can do your slipping and your scoring. Now, because we are putting a basically 45-degree angle here, you need to be quite firm with the pressure that you're putting here. Just make sure it's really nicely attached here. If you're finding that your clay is too floppy and it's not working, it's not sticking up straight, that means it needs to dry out a little bit more. So just pop that in front of the fan for a little while. If you live in a very humid place or you're working in a very humid environment, you might cut out these pieces and leave them for next day. Just depends on the dryness of where you're working. Okay, and you see here, I'm also like flaying them out a little bit. I think that that's nice just to make it easier to get the sponge in. So they're curved a little bit towards the outside and just splayed out just a tiny little bit. Next, we're going to let our sponge holder firm up overnight before I go back in and clean up all the edges. You'll notice that the edges are a little bit rough still. I like to save those for the next day. I think that's way easier when all of my attachments are nice and firm. Yeah, so I just leave them under cloth overnight. Next day, we're just gonna tidy things up. Now, depending on your sink situation, if you want your sponge holder to drain, like if the sponge holder is going to live in the sink or somewhere on the sink that will drain into the sink, you might want to poke some holes here, just like a soap dish, you might want it to drain. Just depends on your situation. So I decided to try that out on one of my pieces to see how that would work out. Okay, now we're just going to let them dry out. I'm going to fire them and glaze them. And here's the final result. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another slab template tutorial. Today we're going to be making this cute salt and pepper shaker that also comes with a little tray. Okay, the first thing you need to do once you've cut out your pieces is patch together K8. This is the one long piece. This is going to be the rim around the tray. It was just too long to fit onto a normal size piece of paper. So you've got to use some tape and just patch it together. So as usual, I'm going to be working with a stoneware today and just give it a wedge and roll it out to 1/2 centimeter thickness. Okay, so your clay is ready to cut out your pieces. So what you want to do is cut out K6 twice, K7 and K8 once, and K5 4 times. This is going to make 2 shakers and 1 tray. Next, I like to put it in front of the fan to dry out a little bit. This just helps with constructing my piece. It makes it a little bit more crisp and not so floppy. So I usually leave it in front of the fan for about 5 to 10 minutes. Now that my pieces are a little bit more firm, I can go ahead and start piecing them together. So I'm going to start with the shakers, and you want to start with the rectangular piece and cut each edge at a 45-degree angle, score and slip or use some water as needed depending on your clay, and piece it together. So you want to press those 45-degree angles together so that they're overlapping, and basically the reason we do this is to make an invisible seam. So press them together, get them nice and stuck, and then you'll want to blend it in. And don't forget the inside. Okay, so then you just want to repeat that for the other shaker. So you should have now 2 cylinders. Now we're going to attach the tops and bottoms. So we're going to be using the round pieces, and first you want to place the cylinders on top. You'll notice that the round pieces are definitely a little bit too big for the cylinders. This is intentional because we want to attach them first and then trim them to size. So use your needle tool to mark exactly where the cylinder sits so you can slip and score as needed and attach. Make sure it's really well attached, and then we're going to move on to the other side. So we're going to close the cylinder, and once we have both sides on, that's when we're going to trim the excess clay. So you want to attach this one just like the other one, slip, score, and attach. Now I like to use a needle tool when removing the clay, and keep in mind the angle of your needle tool because you're going to create an angle here. If you want to have a perfectly straight line, just hold your needle tool straight up and down like I'm doing. You could also bevel the edge by holding your needle tool at an edge. And then of course you want to blend. Repeat for the other side so that you have a closed cylinder. And then you can set that one aside for now because we're going to be doing the same exact thing to the other shaker. Okay, now that our shakers are formed, we're going to move on to the tray. Don't worry, we're going to be adding holes later. I will show you why. We're going to leave that for later in a second. So you want to start with the rim and once again cut the edges at a 45-degree angle. If you don't have this tool, you can just use a needle tool or a knife to cut the 45-degree angle, and then slip and score and attach. Next, we're going to put it on the base. So you want to line it up, and I like to use the shakers to kind of gauge the shape that I'm trying to make. And once again, you'll notice the bottom is too big. That's intentional. So you want to mark where it's going to sit, score both sides, and attach just like we always do. And I like to use a paintbrush to kind of clean up the extra scoring lines. And trim the edge and blend it in. And then a rib is really handy here to kind of clean up that line. Okay, so now that we have the main pieces assembled, we're going to set it aside. So this project works way better if you let the pieces harden up a little bit before you do all of the details. It's just going to leave you with cleaner lines and tidier seams. So what I like to do is leave it under a piece of cloth for overnight, and then the next day I'll go back in and finish things up. So with the tray, I'm basically just smoothing it out. I'm also like using my rib here to scrape a little bit of the extra clay off and try and get like a really sharp edge to this tray. But of course you just do this until you're happy with it. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of an organic look. Ta-da! Now we're going to set that aside to dry completely and move on to the shakers. So first I want to cut the hole for the cork. This is how you can get the salt or pepper into the shaker. You absolutely need to include this part. And what you want to look for is some sort of tapered cork. So whether this is from a wine bottle or oil, or you can also often just buy corks from your pottery supplier. This is where I got these ones from. But it's really important that it's a tapered cork because you want to line up the wider end, and this is going to be the shape that you cut out. You need to account for shrinkage here. So I find that if you just use the wide end, because of shrinkage, it ends up somewhere in between and the cork sits really nice. So I just traced the wide end on, and I'm going to be using my X-Acto knife to cut out that circle. Next, we want to cut the holes where the salt can actually come out. So I'm using here a 3mm drill bit, or 1/8 of an inch. And I find that this is the right size for my clay shrinkage, but you might need to experiment a little bit with your clay to find the exact right size. And you can see I'm testing the cork here. Basically, it should look like this. It should look really loose, like you could just pop the cork through. That's where we want the size to be. Now we just set it to dry. I usually wait about a week until my pots are completely dry. Then I'm going to load them into the bisque kiln. I'm firing at 900 degrees Celsius. I'm using a white glaze here. And in case the holes where the salt comes out gets sealed, you'll definitely want to poke that out again with a needle tool, because otherwise they definitely will seal. And here's our final result. I think these salt shakers are so cute. They're very minimalistic, but very chic at the same time. And I think the cork adds a really cute little quirky element to them. And they also work really nice. So happy making. I hope that you guys love this template, and let me know what you think down below in the comments. See you next time. Hey friends, welcome back to another pottery template. Today we are going to be making this very cool citrus press, or lemon squeezer, or whatever you want to call it. Something that squeezes your citrus. So first thing you need to do is tape together the two parts of K17. This piece was just too long to include on a normal sheet of paper, so I just put it in two parts and just use some tape to tape it together. Then, of course, we need to roll out some clay. So I'm going to be using about 1 kilo of clay here that I'm rolling out. However, please note that I'm not actually using all of that in this project. It's just the amount that you want to grab from your clay to roll out a slab. So you're going to be able to reuse at least half of this. Now I'm going to be using stoneware for this project, but of course you can use any clay you like. Just please make sure that it is a food-safe clay, so air dry clay or polymer clay is not going to work for this project. So I'm rolling out a 1/2 centimeter here, and you're going to want to make it a little bit on the long side, like long and narrow, like you can see I'm doing here, so it can fit this long K17 piece. But of course, if you need to roll it out in pieces, that's also perfectly fine. So then you just want to cut out one of each template. Now, as usual, I like to let my template cutouts dry a little bit in front of the fan before I start working with them. I usually let them dry here for 5 to 10 minutes. This makes them a little bit more firm, which I find easier to work this. So I'm going to start with the cone piece, and here you want to cut both of the flat ends at a 45-degree angle. So make sure you're flipping it halfway in between so that the two angles are able to overlap. And you want to, of course, score the pieces that you're going to attach and use slip if necessary. My clay was wet enough so that I didn't need to use slip here, but that does depend on your clay. So just overlap them and try and smoothen that seam as best you can. I was having a little hard time showing you guys this holding my hands in the right way, but hopefully you get the picture. And then make sure also you want to smooth out the inside too, because this part is going to be exposed as well. Okay, now we can set that aside for now, and we're going to work on the rim. So that's the long, thin piece. And once again, cut at a 45-degree angle and score each side so that they are able to overlap and create a nice invisible seam. Just go ahead and blend. Okay, now we are going to attach the rim here to the base. Now you'll notice with this template, like all of my templates, the base is a little bit bigger than it needs to be. That is because the easiest way to get the nicest connection is to attach first and then trim to size. So you want to mark with your needle tool where you're going to attach it, score those lines, and then just attach it. Be careful to use light but even pressure here to not buckle the walls. And then I like to go back in with some water on a paintbrush to smooth out any extra scoring lines. Once it's well attached, that's when I will cut off the extra and blend the base up into the walls. I'm not too worried about making it perfect just now because I know I'm going to go back in later and smooth everything out. Now we want to add our cone, so you want to try and center it as much as possible, and once again you're going to just draw around it with your needle tool to mark where it's attaching, and then, yeah, use your scoring tool to score both sides. Do use slip if your clay wants you to use slip, and then just give it some nice, soft, light but firm pressure. And try and get your finger in there and blend that seam out. We want as few cracks as possible to make this food safe. Okay, and then if you want to, you can add a spout here now. I recommend you do this now and not later in the build, because right now the clay is very wet and easy to manipulate. Later on, you might risk a crack here if you try and do what I'm doing here. And then for a citrus press, I don't like the cone to be very sharp. So what I like to do is use a rib to kind of pat down that cone a little bit and round it out a little bit more. And this is going to make it more of a soft curve instead of a sharp edge. It just works out better that way. I also made another piece that doesn't have a spout, and later I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with that. So now you want to let them dry out a little bit. So what I like to do is put some cloth over them and let them dry out overnight. This way they're going to be leather hard the next time I get to them. But drying times depends on your region, you know, the weather and the state of your studio. So now I'll go back in and really clean up that edge there. So if it's dry enough, you can use the rib like I'm using here to kind of shave off the extra clay. Otherwise, just do what you normally do, blending it in with your finger. So once that's nice, I'm going to actually carve out the bottom, because you'll notice there's actually some trapped air in here, which is not what we want. We want all of our pieces to be accessible, especially since this is going to be used for food. We want to make sure that everything can get cleaned very easily. So I just cut out the bottom and I'm going to smooth out that seam. Next, it's time to carve the grooves. So for that, I'm using a little loop tool, and you can carve the grooves out any pattern you like. I chose to do 4 around each side and then like lower grooves later on. I think that you can see what I mean better than I can explain it. But you do want to cut some nice grooves in here, because that's what's going to catch the juice out of the citrus. So now that piece is done, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do on this other one that doesn't have a spout. So this is a little experiment of mine, and I'm going to let you know at the end how it turns out. But I wanted something to capture the seeds in the citrus. So I'm using a 1/2 centimeter drill bit to basically make a little sieve on the side of my citrus press. And I'm hoping that that's going to catch all the seeds and all the pulp and just let out the juice. But we're going to test it at the end and see how it goes. Okay, and then you just need to let them dry out. So once they're bone dry, I'm going to pop them into the bisque kiln. And here I'm glazing my citrus press. Make sure you remove the glaze from the bottom, and then back into the kiln for the final fire. And here is our final results. So this is the press that has the built-in sieve. And I just think that this is such a cool shape, a cool form. It's such a kitchen essential. It's just so practical. I don't know about you guys, but I use a lot of lemons in my cooking. And I just think that this is gonna make the whole process a lot easier. I used to squeeze them by hand and then run it through a sieve. And I've been using this press the last few weeks, and it works really well. So yeah, let's test out the sieve. Ta-da! One thing I learned, I might actually remake this because the holes should be a little bit higher than I made them. Like if you're squeezing a particularly juicy lemon, sometimes the holes have been too low and then the juice just spills out onto my counter. So if you're gonna make this, definitely put the holes a little bit higher than I did. But of course, the standard, I think this is how most citrus presses are designed, the standard lip works just fine. And then if you don't have any seeds, or if you don't mind seeds, you can just pour it right in, or you can use a sieve to sieve out the pulp. And that's all. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. You can find the templates down below, and I've got loads more templates on my channel, so definitely check those out, and I'll see you guys next month with the next template. Bye, friends. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another slab pottery tutorial. Today we are tackling the long-awaited butter dish. This was a project that was requested for quite a while, and I'm so happy to have it for you today. It took a little longer than usual because I wanted to be sure to accommodate at least 2 different butter dish sizes. So I do have a quote-unquote European size, which is also similar to the West Coast American butter size, and also the standard American butter size, the stick size. But I do think that these sizes can apply to a lot of butter around the world. Who knew that making a butter dish would be so complicated? But I'm going to get more into the sizes later. Here you can see I'm already getting into the tutorial, so let's talk about it. So what you've seen so far is I've just cut out each piece that I'm going to be using, the pieces that correspond to the European size butter dish that I'm going to be demonstrating here. However, the steps are exactly the same if you choose the American size. So I cut out the pieces and I rolled out a slab. You want to be working with a 1/2 centimeter slab here. Once the slab is rolled out, you want to just set your template pieces onto the slab, line them up so that you can cut out one of each piece with the exception of the butter dish side. So for the European butter dish, that is K10, and for the US, that's K13. Then, as usual, I always recommend you setting your cut-out template pieces in front of the fan for 5 to 10 minutes so that they can firm up. This is extra important with this template. I would consider this template a slightly more difficult template, an intermediate, let's say an intermediate level of template. You're going to see in a moment why, but the moisture level in your clay here is crucial for how tidy your piece turns out to be. So we're going to start with the lid, and with the side piece, you want to score around the edges, and then you also want to score the long side of the lid. Your template will also show you where exactly you should be scoring here. And then you want to add some slip if you need it. You don't need to add slip. I just added a little bit of water here. It just depends on your clay. And here is the crucial part. So you want to lift up the lid of your pot to attach it to the lid side. But here, you know your moisture level is correct in your clay if it's not sagging too much. Like you can see it's bowed out a little bit on mine here, but like if it's really falling over, that's not what you want. You want your clay to be firm enough here so that it's not going to sag too much while you set it on its side here. This is really important because clay has memory, and you are probably going to struggle later with keeping those edges straight if it's sagging too much here. A little bit is fine. Try and keep it as straight as possible, but yeah, that's what we're going to be looking out for at this stage. And then you just want to repeat it for the other side. Okay, once the 2 sides are attached, we're going to set it aside for now and work on our bottom. So for turning up the bottom edges, What you want to do is score just the corners here, just the part that are cut at a bevel. And then you want to use a ruler here because this is the key to getting sharp edges. So use the ruler to basically like turn up the sides like I'm doing here, and use your thumbs to really push that corner. And then just go around all sides of the dish, turning up each edge one by one, making sure that you blend in those corners so you get a good attachment. Now, when you're moving this, you also want to be sure not to lift it up and like let it flop very much. Try and slide it along and keep the bottom as straight as possible. This is also going to help a lot with warping later on. So now we're back at our lid. I just wanted to set it aside for a moment so that the moisture level could equalize, that the slip could soak in, and it could get a little bit stronger. Now we are going to be blending the edges here, but I'm not focused too much on making it perfect. The blending here is a more structural blend. It's just to get that attachment really well done. I'm going to save tidying it up and making it really look nice for later when it's drier. So once it's well blended, you can just set it aside and we'll deal with the scriggly bits later on. For the handle, I like to use this thick ruler. I'd say it's about a centimeter, maybe a centimeter and a half thick. You can use whatever, just something round really helps to form that handle. We're going to set it on our lid, make sure it's nice and even, and mark where it's attaching. Score as you would anything else. You can also add some slip here if you like. And then attaching it, you don't want to push directly on. Unless your clay has a lot of grog in it, it's probably not going to be strong enough to just push the handle in. So what I did is I turned it up on its side, which allowed me to support the inside that I was pushing into with my other hand. So yeah, I'm turning it so you can see a little bit better here. My hand is supporting the lid so that I'm not like collapsing the lid when I'm pushing the handle into it. And there you go. You can just tidy it up with a paintbrush. I always like to use that to clean up extra scoring marks. You can see I made a few of them here and I'm letting them dry overnight to firm up a little bit under some plastic. You want them to firm up now to leather hard. Now, this is the point that we're going to be tidying things up. I pretty much do this with all of my templates. I always find that when you let things get to leather hard, they just look nicer. They end up crispier. They're just, It definitely pays to be patient with ceramics. So I'm just blending and smoothing, just as much as I want to. You can do it as long as you want. And then you can see how nice they look together. Ta-da! Okay, they're finally ready to be fired. So with bisque, I will fire them together, the two parts of the butter dish. The weight of the lid on the base is going to help keep it flat, but of course for the glaze fire, I will have to fire them separately. So popping them in for the final fire. And here is the final result. So I've got my US butter dish and I've got my European butter dish, and I'm using these terms loosely. I'm sure that there's different styles all over the world. I'm going to add on the screen right now the different sizes of like the interior of the butter dishes, assuming 1/2 centimeter walls and a 10% shrinkage rate, which is what I did here. And then you can measure your butter at home and see if that's going to fit within there. So fun fact, I really wanted to get a American size butter dish so I could show you guys that it would fit, but obviously you can't get those here. So what I did is I had my mom mail me the wax paper so I would be sure to get it correct, and then I just cut down a normal butter to fit there. I thought that was pretty extra. I hope you enjoyed the video. I have the template linked down below, and until next month, bye friends. Hey friends, I am very excited to share with you my new pottery template today. This is going to be the storage jar, another template in my kitchen collection that I'm working on right now, and it's a place where you can store all of your goodies, not limited to the kitchen. So first thing you want to do, of course, is cut out all the templates, and then you do need to paste K19 together with some tape. So we're going to be rolling out two different slab thicknesses here. Firstly, I want to roll out a 1/2 centimeter slab. This is going to be the main body of the project. So you want to use this 1/2 centimeter slab for the templates K19, K21, and K9. And then I'll use these scraps to roll out a 1 centimeter slab. You want to make sure you wedge it if you're going to be using your scraps here. Now this piece wasn't quite big enough to fit both of the other templates, but theoretically you should do K22 and K20 on this 1 centimeter slab. So I just cut one out and then I used the scraps again to cut out the other piece. Once everything's cut out, I like to put everything in front of the fan for a little bit to firm up. If you've seen any other of my template tutorials, you know that I like to do this because then the pieces become a little bit more firm, they're easier to work with and less floppy. So I'm going to start with the body of the template. I like to cut my edges at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to score both sides as well so I can attach these two sides together. You don't need to worry about your seam being perfect just now. The main idea is to get it stuck quite well, and we can always go back later, again, when the piece is leather hard, to clean it up. And don't forget the inside. Okay, now we're going to attach the base. So there's a lot of circles going on here. Just make sure you have the right piece. This is the 21 template. And you'll notice the base is a little bit bigger than the actual bottom of the jar. This is the same for all the bases of all my templates. I make them this way so that you can attach it first and then cut it later. So you want to score each side and make sure it's attached really well. And once it's attached, then you'll want to cut it to size and blend. Now, in case you had any extra scoring marks like I did on the inside here, you can use a paintbrush with some water to just smooth out those extra lines. Okay, now we're gonna set that aside and we're gonna work on the lid. So basically the lid is just two thickish pieces of clay stacked on top of each other. I wanted to make the lid 1 centimeter thick to kind of give it a little bit more weight. I really like when my lids are a bit beefy. So just mark where it's going to sit. Make sure it's nice and centered and mark where it's going to sit. And then what we're gonna do is score all of the parts where it's gonna be attached. So it's gonna be a lot of scoring here. And then now I want you to pay attention here because we want to be sure to not trap any air bubbles here. So can you see what I'm doing with my finger? I'm kind of going in a spiral from the center, pressing down, 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 trying to push out all of the air to the outside. So the middle is attached first and then out and out and out. That is the goal. So it sticks really well and doesn't trap any air. And then once again, if you need to clean up any edges, I usually do with a paintbrush and a little bit of water. Okay, now let's work on the handle. So that's this little piece right here, and I like to use a marker. I found this one marker works really well. It's about 1.5 centimeters in diameter, but whatever you can find that feels like the right height. It really helps to use something here to shape it nice and evenly. Now we're simply just going to attach it to the lid. The only tricky part here is you want to be very gentle with the handle. Make sure when you're sticking it down, you're not distorting it or anything. Score both sides and attach. I also added a little bit of water to the handle. This just depends on your clay if you need to add water or slip here. If the clay is nice and moist, you don't usually need to, but because this is the last part I was doing that day, the handle had dried out a little bit in the meantime. Ta-da! And I think the proportions on this jar are just so nice. I really like it with a thicker lid. So I'm going to let these guys firm up overnight under a bit of cloth until they're leather hard. This way I can come back in tomorrow and clean everything up. So tidying things up always takes the longest. I just tell people, just tidy up to the point that you're happy with it. Look for any little scriggly bits that might become sharp later on. Look for any, scratches. Sometimes you nick it with your fingernail. Anything that you don't like, this is your time when it's leather hard to tidy things up. Once they're looking good, you just set them to dry, and I usually let mine dry about a week. Okay, now we are loading up the bisque kiln. And I'm dipping them in some white glaze. Now don't forget to wipe your bottoms. We're not going to fire these glazed pieces together, so you want to wipe the bottoms of the jar and the bottoms of the lid so they don't stick to your kiln shelves. Okay, and here's how they turned out. So as you can see, I made 2 different sizes of jar. I don't know if you know this about my templates, but they work at pretty much any size. You can infinitely size them up or down to make whatever size piece you want. So the largest jar is the standard, that's the 100%. And then I did the other two jars at 80% and 90% scale. So this is something that you can just change in your printer settings. I think these jars look just so cute. I love the way that the food pops against the white, but I think they would also look so lovely in some bright colors as well. I'm so excited to see what you guys make with these templates, so make sure you tag me on Instagram at Pottery to the People so I can see your projects. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions down below. The template is also available down below, so go check it out, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye, friends. Hey friend, welcome back to another pottery tutorial. Today we're going to make this long-awaited template. This has been a much requested one. This is the coffee drip coffee filter template. So first thing you need to do, as always, is cut out the templates, and then K23 does need to be pasted together with some tape because, you know, the template was just too big to fit on one page. Okay, set that aside. We're going to roll out two different slab thicknesses here. I'm going to start with a 1/2 centimeter slab. And if you don't know already, you should definitely be using thickness gauges just to make sure that your slab is the right thickness. Okay, this whole big slab is just going to be for the main part of the coffee drip. This is the cone, this is K23. The other pieces, I recommend you use a slightly thicker slab. So I'm just cutting this piece out and I'm gonna set it aside for now. And then I can use my scraps to make a 1 centimeter thickness slab. So make sure you wedge out any air bubbles, and then you want to use some 1 centimeter thickness gauges to get it to 1 centimeter. With this 1 centimeter slab, we want to cut out the other pieces, that's K24 and K25. It's going to be the base and the ring. A couple people have been asking me lately how much clay you want to start out with. So I usually start out with 1 kilo of clay. Of course, you never end up using all your clay up. There's always leftovers because you're cutting out these shapes. But I do, of course, reuse all of the clay. You're not going to use up that whole 1 kilo, maybe half of it. It just depends on which template exactly you're using. Okay, and then as usual, if you watch my videos before, you know I always put my slab pieces in front of a fan first to firm up before I continue working with them. If you do this or not, it just depends on the clay that you're using, but my clay is a little bit loose, so I like to firm it up before I start working with it. You want it to still be bendable, but I don't want it to be floppy. So I usually put it in front of the fan for about 10 minutes. Okay, and then we're going to start with assembling the cone first. So you want to cut the straight ends at a 45-degree angle. And of course, make sure you flip it in between so that the 45-degree angles overlap. I have this great angle cutter tool, but if you don't have this tool, no worries. You can just use a knife or a needle tool. And then you just want to overlap them and press them together. I always have to do these things at such an awkward angle so that the camera can pick it up so you guys can see, but hopefully you can see clearly what I'm doing here. And of course, don't forget the inside as well. If you're getting any cracks, just feel free to rub them out. And now we're going to move on to the ring. So once again, 45-degree angles, make sure you flip it in between, score, use slip if you need to. I don't need to use slip with my clay. If I feel the need, I'll just use a little bit of water. And then this is kind of a tight turn here, which means your clay is going to be more prone to cracking. So just turn it, make sure you have a good connection there. And if you see any cracking along the edges here, like I'm smoothing out right now, that's totally fine. Just smooth it out with your finger. My clay does have a tendency to crack a little bit, so your clay might not do that, hopefully. And then we're going to attach the ring first. This is much easier than to do the cone first. So you want to place the ring, obviously center it, score both sides, and attach. And then I like to use a paintbrush with just some water on it to smooth out any extra scoring marks. It just tidies it up a little bit, but of course you want to make sure you're not adding too much water. So that's the little ring that's going to sit inside of the cup. And then because we're going to be adding the cone now, I really recommend you add some support here. So I found that my 1 centimeter thickness gauges plus the 1/2 centimeter thickness gauges are the perfect height to support the base. I just want to make sure that I'm not distorting and pushing down the base as I'm working, because even if you flatten it out later, clay does have memory. So if this wobbles a little bit while you're working on it, you might end up with warping later on. So you want to center your cone on top. I was talking over it, but you do want to pat the cone down a little bit into your wedging board to flatten out that edge a little bit, just so that it's more stable as you're attaching it here. Mark where it's attached, score both sides, and then don't worry, we're going to add a little bit more support in a minute. So press it in as nicely as you can without warping the base. Make sure that it's nice and stable. And if it can sit, great. If not, you can just hold it up. Maybe I should have done this before attaching, but you do want to roll out a coil. This should be about a pencil thickness, something like that. And then we're going to use this coil to press in and support our cone. So I'm just slowly working it in. This takes a while, don't worry, and you want to blend it up into the cone and down into the base if you want a seamless look. Especially with dishware, anything to do with food, you want to be able to put it in your dishwasher, you want to be able to clean it thoroughly, so any cracks here you do want to get rid of, because food can get stuck in those cracks and, you know, bacteria can grow in them. Okay, the rest we are going to do tomorrow. I want my coffee drip to firm up to leather hard tonight so that I can carve in the grooves later on and, you know, do the final cleaning up. So depending on the humidity in your studio, I usually put a piece of cloth over it and then just let it sit overnight to firm up. That works well in my basement studio, but if you live in a more arid place, you might rather cover it with plastic. Just depends on your studio situation and how much water you added to your clay. First, I'm going to go ahead and tidy everything up. I'm going to smooth out the sharp edges. You can see here there's a few like squiggly bits on the edges and just like sharpness. So if it's dry enough, I like to use my rib to kind of shave off those edges, and then I'll go back in with my finger to smooth it out. If you can't shave it, just smooth it out with your finger, and I'll go over the whole piece that way. Get it nice and smooth before we do the next steps. Okay, the next step is to carve the grooves. So I have this tiny little loop tool that I like to use for these detail works. But you can use any sort of trimming tool you have. The loop tool that comes in like a standard beginner's pottery kit is also totally fine. It might be a little bit bigger of a groove than what I'm having here, but it's totally fine. We want to carve these grooves so that the coffee can drip through the filter and just like slide down the grooves to the bottom of the cup. So this is actually a really important part for the functionality of your coffee drip. You need to have some sort of texture on the outside so that the coffee can drip through. And if you've waited to the right amount of moisture level in your clay, carving this can be a real pleasure. If you have any sharp edges, you can just rub them out with your finger. Okay, now it's time to add the hole. So I'm using a hole cutter here. I'm gonna put up on the screen exactly how wide it is because I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you don't have a hole cutter, you can also just use a drill bit. And the width of your hole cutter or drill bit doesn't really matter that much. I've been told by coffee experts that it's the filter that slows down the drip. It's not actually the hole. So the hole can be a bit bigger or smaller, whatever you like. So I'm going to let it dry for about a week before I load it into the bisque kiln. And as usual with these templates, I just go for a nice white glaze. This is just a very simple white. The speckles that you see in my pottery projects, that is actually iron in the clay. So just look for a clay that has added iron in it, or a speckled clay body if you want to get that same look. Back into the kiln, so I fire at 1240 because this is stoneware. And here is the final result. I think that this piece is not only functional, but it's also just like such a beautiful piece as an art object. You could always add a handle here as well. Some people like to have a handle on their coffee drips. I prefer this nice clean look. And then these are the filters that I use. And this is kind of a standard filter. It's called a Hario V60, but any V60 filter should work. The 60 refers to the angle at which the filter is designed for. So the coffee drip that we have is at a 60-degree angle. And if you fold it nicely, it will fit perfectly. And if you're wondering about the mug that's on screen, this is my tea mug, which is another template that I have available. Now I hope that you guys enjoyed that video. Please leave any comments down below if you have any questions or you enjoyed the video. That helps please the algorithm gods. Of course, I'll have the template linked down below. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye, friend.